like to introduce yourself?
Yes. Hi everyone. I'm Steve, Madagascar's Media and Communications Officer. Thanks everyone for coming along tonight. I will be putting some information in the chat box. So yeah, hope you enjoy.
So I'm quickly just going to go through how the event will run and just a bit of housekeeping. So we have 4 speakers with us this evening who I'll quickly introduce in a moment. So they're each going to introduce themselves, and then we've got 3 questions for the panel, and then we'll have a Q&A at the end. Feel free to be putting questions in the chat bar throughout the talk and then again at the end. We are recording this event, just to let you know, and if you have any questions or technical issues, then just ask Laura in the chat box too. This event should go on for about 45 minutes to an hour, depending on how many questions you have. So yeah. So the theme of this event is the future of rainforests, as it's World Rainforest Day. That's what we're all here to celebrate and discuss. We really want to be thinking about sort of long-term conservation goals, how to, thinking far into the future with our rainforest conservation work. Just going to go on to the next slide. Ooh. Sorry, it's not letting me. 1 second. Sorry, it's going to have to.
It wouldn't be a normal Zoom without a few technical hitches, so don't worry.
Okay, so our speakers for this evening, from Seed Madagascar, we have Sam, our forestry specialist, and then we also have Lisa Bass, the Director of Operations and Programs. From Planet Madagascar, we have Travis, and from the Lemur Conservation Network, we have Seheno. So I'm going to stop sharing this, and I'm going to pass over to Travis to start with to introduce himself.
Wonderful, thank you. And thank you everyone for coming here, and thanks for having me for today's panel. I'm going to represent dry forest because that's where I work, and there is no World Dry Forest Day. And so we're going to just lump rainforest and dry forest together. But I'm an assistant professor at the University of Guelph. And I started Planet Madagascar because of a perceived need. It was a bit of a sad story, but myself and a colleague from Madagascar were doing research, and we met a young girl who happened to pass away because of an ailment that was relatively easy to cure. And I was doing research on these lemurs that you see above my shoulder, and I thought it was kind of crazy that I was able to find a lot of money relative to people in Madagascar to study these lemurs, but it wasn't having a direct impact on communities. And I noticed that, as one does when they're studying in Madagascar, the impact on lemurs and the impact on people was connected. And so myself and my colleague from Madagascar, Mami Raza Fitsalama, and I started Planet Madagascar with this mission of connecting lemur conservation to communities through a medium of essentially forest conservation, because that was their shared landscape. And we've been doing that as a nonprofit since 2015, and we became a charity in Canada in this year, just a few weeks ago. And so we have continued our operations in the same section of Northwest Madagascar, which is one of the last vestiges of intact dry forest in Madagascar. And I'm very much looking forward to being here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. It's great to have you here, Travis. Could we go to you, Seheno, next? Introduce yourself, say a little bit about Lemur Conservation Network.
Yeah, thank you so much. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for this event and for having me today. My name is Senou Kortuan-Saralaz. I'm the Madagascar manager of the Lemur Conservation Network. So the Lemur Conservation Network, or LCN, is a network we have like 60 member organizations that work on lemur conservation, and our work in the LCN is to raise awareness about the lemurs. So why we work with our members to save lemurs from the extinctions, and we want to create space for inspiration, for education, for empowerment and collaboration for the lemur conservation community, and the local community involvement and empowerment that are at the heart of our work with LCN members. LCN is a project from the UECN specialist group. So the founders, Lynn Venner, work on 2015, and now we are a non-profit organization based in US. But our members work mainly on the ground in Madagascar for lemur conservation. So, yeah.
Thank you. It's great to have you here. And now to Seed Madagascar. Lisa, if you'd like to introduce yourself and the organisation, then we can go to Sam afterwards to hear a bit more about Seed's work, specifically with forestry.
Hi, well, my name's Lisa and I'm the Director of Programmes and Operations for Seed Madagascar, which is a British charity that has been working down in the far southeast corner of Madagascar for about 20 years now. And our story is very much like Travis described. From Planet Madagascar. We also started out as a conservation NGO, but very, very quickly it becomes so very obvious that for the communities who live around the forests and the rivers and the oceans that, you know, all of us love so much, it's very, very difficult to put conservation as your priority when your daily needs for health, education and food are so very difficult to achieve. So we very quickly became a development and conservation NGO, and we work all across health, education, sustainable livelihoods, water, sanitation, and of course right at our heart is still conservation. I will pass you over to Sam now because she knows much more than I do about forestry and Seed's forestry work.
Thanks, Lisa. Hi, everyone. My name's Sam. I'm a forestry specialist, mainly for Project ALA, which means forest in Malgache. So basically, Project ALA started in April 2019. And it is basically a project to reconnect 3 endangered lemur species in the littoral forest down where Lisa was mentioning. We are basically a conservation project, whereas quite a lot of these other projects are very livelihood based. So it's really in our goal to also ensure that we work with the community alongside our conservation project. But yeah, we are doing reforestation of 4 corridors to reconnect those 3 lemur species. And we're just in our phase 2 now, which is going to last about 3 years. That's the basics.
Great, thank you so much for those introductions, everyone. So as we've said before, we're going to have 3 set questions before moving on to more of an open Q&A at the end. And as I said before, please post any questions in the chat box throughout. With the questions, they're slightly different for the Lemur Conservation Network because as a network, they have different aims and different goals compared to Planet Madagascar and Seed, who are single organisations. So when they're slightly reworded, that's the reason. So our first question for the panel is, how do you think community-led conservation helps achieve your forestry conservation goals? And I'd like to go to Sam first with that question, please.
Great, thanks. Well, yeah, like I said, we are primarily a conservation project, but so we're very based on research and the actual reforestation of the site, with a goal of protecting and reconnecting those 3 endangered lemur species. But we do have a key component, and that is working with key stakeholders. So we work mainly with the Forest Management Committee, which is made up of locally appointed people in St. Luce, who then between them manage the forests of St. Luce. We then also work with landowners. So currently we work with 6 landowners within our 4 corridors. And we're going to work with them a lot closer actually into this new phase. But throughout our first phase, which started in 2019 and just ended this past March, we actually found that working with the community is more necessary than we originally thought going into this project. Not that it wasn't in our mind when we started this project, it's just that we've now, from working with the community, we've now seen what needs the community need to go forward to expand the project and make it more inclusive of certain people, or where you work with the community to actually understand their needs, such as resources. I'll give you one example. We didn't think about the surrounding communities of St. Luce, which could have an impact on the project. So working with the Forest Management Committee and talking with them on a monthly basis, we actually found that fires weren't being started, or weren't predominantly being started, from the people of St. Luce around our conservation zone. So we work in just one area of the littoral forest to reconnect it, and surrounding that area is actually protected or within it. And we started then to see that, okay, if we weren't working with the Forest Management Committee, we wouldn't have seen or heard or found that actually there's other people from outlying communities that are actually starting those fires and having an impact because they don't have resources of their own. So just working with those key partners within our project, it actually shows you, the needs of the community and how working with them ensures the conservation of your own project. The community help you to achieve your goals, especially on the ground with our activities in reforestation. We wouldn't be able to do the tree planting and anything like that without the community support. So yeah, you really need to have a direct link with the community to ensure, especially a conservation project which doesn't have a livelihoods aspect attached to it. You really need them to understand what your project means and work with them closely to achieve those goals.
Thank you, Sam. So it's really interesting hearing your thoughts on that. Travis, if we go to you next about the importance of community-led conservation and helping achieve your goals with Planet Madagascar.
Yeah, so for full disclosure, a lot of our ideas in Planet Madagascar, we just borrowed from seed. And in fact, Lisa hosted myself and Mommy, who helps us run Planet Madagascar in Madagascar, down in their projects, and we watched a lot of the great work they were doing. We did ours a little bit differently, just because the context of our communities are different. Ours are inside of a national park in dry forest that has its own difficulties. But we also had the exact same issue regarding communities outside of our management zone creating a lot of impact within our management zone. And so we started quite early to just talk with communities and listen to what their needs were. And we try to, as best we can, incorporate those early into the planning processes of projects, but we also check in throughout to make sure that we're sort of achieving our goals of say, in this case, forest restoration, while still meeting some of the needs of the community through our other livelihoods projects. Or we might bring together a conservation or livelihoods project into the same thing. But it's the community is, everyone knows this, the community is integral. Without the community, we couldn't do any of it. We require, at the very basic level, there requires human resources to make this stuff happen. human capital is very important, but there's immense amount of knowledge in communities as well that's really beneficial. For example, in our communities, they help us determine which seeds would make the most sense to plant for forest restoration. We do that in partnership with the community and the National Park Service, and then expertise within our own organization as well. We blend the three together to sort of come up with a solution to forest restoration locally, because one area's forest needs is a little bit different from the next, depending on the context. We also very much rely heavily on the community members to provide resources for our projects. And so there's a lot of in-kind contributions the community will provide, and they most often are doing it because of just their pure interests of maintaining and restoring forests. And so that's been integral to, especially when we're between grants, it's great for them to continue with assisting our projects and providing some in-kind assistance. So yeah, I could go on and on about how important communities are, and I think we all know that, but I'm sure it's just a little bit different in each spot, but fundamentally they drive a lot of the decisions or help guide the direction of the projects.
Thank you, Travis. Yeah, you make an important point about just how fundamental community is. It's not just a additional added extra to a conservation project. It's like completely key to the whole thing. So Hannah, if we go to you, the question is slightly different, the Lemur Conservation Network. How do you support the organizations in your network to do community-led conservation?
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here and to hear Seed Madagascar and Planet Madagascar, because both organizations are LCN members, and we know that Seed Madagascar and Planet Madagascar are doing amazing work with local communities. And when I heard Sam and Travis, it's really important to hear that, because you share your expertise, and that's really important to also share with other members and other folks who are doing great job also on Madagascar. So that's I wanted to say that. And at LCN we really support our members to work closely with local communities, because we are totally convinced that local involvement and collaboration with local communities are the key component, as you said, key component and are critical to achieve forestry conservation goals. And we support our members through education awareness, because we also know that we need to educate people, and also including kids at school, to achieve our conservation goals. And it's really important to LCN that our members work closely with local communities, and we know that local communities contribute also to achieve the conservation. So there are two components. We know that conservation organizations work on the resources that are needed by local communities, but they also involve them in reforestation activities, in nurseries activities, and that's really important. And at LCN, we shine a spotlight we highlight this work, this amazing work done by our members, and that's why we are really doing work through the social media, through our website, through the blog posts, because we want to hear such a success story, the work with local communities, because the fact is sometimes we think that conservation organization works at conservation, and that's really work done by foreigners or other, but we know that at a local stage and in each spot, it's not true. We work closely with local communities, and at LCN we want to highlight this amazing work. So that's really important, and we do that with our members.
Thank you. Yeah, LCN does an amazing job of bringing together organisations and sharing skills and ideas, and your great support to all your members. So thank you. On to our second question, which is kind of about COVID and recovery and moving forward as we start to see the end of what's been really a difficult time. So the question is, how has COVID-19 affected forest conservation and working on the ground? I'd like to go to Travis first for this question, please.
Thank you. Yeah, and thanks to Hino for all the efforts LCN is doing. Plan Madagascar loves all your when you profile us and when you mention us, we really appreciate it. Yeah, what hasn't COVID affected in our lives and anywhere? And I was sitting on a Skype call because our director of operations was stuck in the UK for the first few months of COVID in a workshop that was only supposed to last a few weeks, which ended up lasting many months because he was stuck there. So that was the beginning of the effect of COVID for us. And I said to him, this must be the first time that you, me, and everyone else in the world have the exact same problem. And the way it affected us is we're a very small organization, and this probably doesn't make a difference regarding size, but we became frozen in our ability to support the communities in the way we wanted to at the beginning of COVID. We couldn't send supplies readily because of local shutdowns and transportation being quite difficult. But because Madagascar is a little bit more flexible in how things can get done, and they're actually very sophisticated in the ability to service people when needed. If you can leverage the existing systems in Madagascar, you can actually get a lot done. So we were able to pivot, and we were able to keep boots on the ground because most of our projects are run by community members themselves. So we didn't need staff from our head office to go out. We just needed a mobile phone connection. The right key players were able to continue the projects, albeit with less equipment. Although we were able to send PPE out, which was great, so personal protective equipment, we're able to do education about that. So we at first were completely obliterated by COVID, but we're able to recover relatively quickly and to maintain a baseline of project work going on in the communities. And partially in thanks to people who are, I think, sitting in the audience. We got some small donations from a number of people and some larger ones as well to help us sort of go over the hump of getting the equipment we needed where it needed to be at the right time. So thank you all for assisting with that.
Thank you, Travis, for that answer. I'd like to go to Lisa next to speak about how SEED dealt with working on the ground during COVID.
Yeah, and I really take on board a lot of what Travis said. I'm smiling because I think for, particularly Sam and I, we left Madagascar March, April last year, and we've been unable to get back. So it's been a huge change for SEED in so many ways. But in terms of COVID in particular, yes, I think it's had a huge effect on conservation in Madagascar and how that's done. I think it's probably more subtle than we see in places like Europe. In Madagascar, we haven't had huge 3-4 month lockdowns, where you're not allowed to go out and shop and you can't go to restaurants or see family. That's just not going to be the case in Madagascar. But what we have had is, I think, COVID affect us in maybe 2 very different ways. So the first one, as we've been talking about already, is that communities are so important to good conservation action. And that becomes even more difficult as poverty levels increase. And Madagascar already is one of the poorest countries in the world. And then the impact of not only COVID, but we've got famine, we've got drought, we've got huge levels of malaria at the moment across the south. And all of that has really impacted on the communities. So, you know, we've had transport stoppages, which means that, you know, not only have we not been able to get in and out of Madagascar, but even, you know, the taxi Bruces stopped running. They stopped running across the south coast. They stopped running up to Tanna. Air stopped. Routes to sea stopped. And that then had a huge impact on markets. So we saw, for example, in St. Luce, all the lobster exporters left because they couldn't get lobsters out of the country. So the whole fishing community suffered because so many of them relied on lobster fishing. At the same time, Mahampi, the reeds, markets all the way across the south closed up as people weren't moving around. We had no tourists. So not only did Seed not have sort of people coming through, but the local eco lodge, which paid for people to go, you know, the Fimpia, the Cobar fees, so the forestry fees that the community put back into managing their forests, all of those stopped. Guides, guardians, cooks, all of those people lost their jobs. So suddenly you've got a country and a community that already is very poor being thrust into even more poverty, whilst we're still saying, but what about conservation? What about conserving the forests, the oceans, the wetlands, all of those things which are so important? But when you have no money to put food on the table for your family, pale in insignificance. So we've got the context and how COVID really affected that. And then we've got sort of how it particularly affected conservation. So we had a very start-stop kind of impact on our research as the teams couldn't get back to the bush. Our conservation team lost immediately half of its members as the international staff were evacuated, leaving our national colleagues to manage the whole programme and step into people's shoes. They had to learn new skills. We did a lot of training over Zoom, and it was brilliant, and credit to the rest of the team who are still on the ground. They have pulled an amazing job off of continuing with the research, which I think has learned a lot of lessons for Seed into how we'll go forward into the future. But, you know, for communities, very, very difficult time with COVID, and for our staffing, very difficult time. And as Travis said, a very, very difficult time as well for funders. You know, back sort of around a year ago, we saw a lot of funders halting their funding rounds. So funders we would have usually gone to for conservation, be there sort of, you know, government or embassies or trust funds, suddenly postponed their funding rounds. And then what we saw is a diversion of those funds from conservation over into health and COVID mitigation. So an incredibly difficult time to find funding to continue those conservation efforts as well. So I think for all of those reasons, COVID has had and will continue to have a massive impact on people's ability, you know, whether they be us as an NGO or the communities themselves in taking forward those conservation efforts. Certainly for this year, but my guess is for 2 to 3 years into the future as well, we will be still feeling the impacts of COVID-19.
Thanks for that, Lisa. That was really nice to hear your insight on that. I think, Sahinu, it would be interesting to hear your insight on how COVID's affected Madagascar, and I know you're based in Tanna, so if you would like to share anything on that, that would be great.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, that's really true. Suddenly, the COVID-19 has devastating effects on local communities, on conservation, and on the economy of Madagascar. I'm also the in-country director of the NGO Lemur. We work in the south of Madagascar, and for example, in the south of Madagascar, they already have if they cope with the Madagascar extreme conditions, you know, the drought, the impact of climate change, the low annual rainfall. They have natural disasters, not just the COVID, but like the other disasters, and they don't have people lost their job. There are no tourism, so we like Seed Madagascar and Planet Madagascar, we also tried to raise fundraising for these people. So yeah, that's it's really hard to talk about how can we imagine when people don't have anything, that they don't have anything, like even water if there is no rainfall, and the one source of income, for example, for in south of Madagascar, in Timanapet, just the tourism, and there is no tourism. There is a never alternative income. How can we imagine? I think I cannot even imagine how this impact the people. In Antananarivo, yes, we have COVID, but you know, we can even work, and there is a lockdown, but people have to go out to feed their family. But it's not the case in other regions. So that's really, really sad. On the other hand, at the LCN, we tried to think more about how can we help and support in another way our members and our audience through the social media during the COVID-19. And one lesson we learned is when we tried to organize more virtual events for our members, even those who are based in Madagascar or outside Madagascar, we really take advantage of the travel restriction, the lockdown, and people, even in Madagascar, are more interested to join event, a virtual event like through Zoom, like a panel discussion, like we have this now. And it was amazing because we realized that we can also gather people, so members outside Madagascar and those who are on the ground. We can have a panel discussion, and online platform is a good way to gather people. So we tried to do that during our Lemur Festival at the LCN, and we realized that we can also take advantage to do more virtual events and to gather. And so voice from Madagascar, we can hear voice from local communities, local researchers, local conservationists. And also another lesson that we learned, I think you in Planet Madagascar, and Lisa, we Seed Madagascar, you said this before, the training. We realized that when we organize a webinar series for local conservationists or local researchers, they are really motivated to learn, to have new skills. And the COVID-19 learned that we need to train more and more, to give more skill, to train more, give opportunities also to local researchers to have new skills, and we can share the expertise. So when we have the travel restrictions like that, we can always train and provide more skills for local conservationists. And at the LCN, we are doing now the webinar series. So we provide training for statistical analysis or spatial analysis to our members, and especially for who are based in Madagascar. So yes, COVID-19 has a really devastating effects, but we have also to consider this another way that we learned from the COVID-19. Yeah.
Thank you for that. It's very true. Despite all the devastation, it has allowed us to find new ways to connect, which has been really important and useful. On to the final set question, and this is about long-term conservation. And the question is, what is your vision for forest conservation for the next 10 years? Sam, if we go to you first with this question.
Sure. Yeah, so like I said, we're currently in a second phase of Project ALA. So that will take us to 5 years since the project began. But basically, when planning the second phase, we took a lot of learnings from the first phase and developed a lot of ideas from our communication with the community and things like that, and the needs of the community going forward. So what was built through SEED is actually a conservation strategy. So this looks at the next 5 years, and it doesn't just encompass just ALA, it encompasses our other conservation projects that we have running, especially through SCRP. And so this is basically looking at like longer term goals to guide the development of those shorter term projects, basically strategically. So building like greater stability, long-term impacts, focused goals, over long-term like time frames where results can be measured over a longer term and then be used effectively to build that project. And it also, like Lisa was saying, it can build like multi-year funding opportunities as well for those donors that want to keep funding the progress of different projects to see them succeed, which is quite nice. So within this strategy that lasts for the next 5 years, and then we'll reassess it and look at what we need to be changing, we're looking at things like research, conservation action, sustainable management of natural resources, community engagement and partnership. And then, like I said, we use then our learnings from the previous phases or previous learnings from other projects that we can build into this project, disseminating those findings to the community members. So yeah, so we have thinking long term with our conservation strategy, but then from that we've also been able to build a forest biodiversity conservation strategy. So this is actually looking at the next 10 to 15 years. So within that we have 4 major components, looking at reforestation, so actual reforestation on the ground, building those forests, making parts of the area larger or creating those corridors, whatever the needs of that area. Addressing community resource needs, so working with those key stakeholders on the ground to build up or understand what the needs are of the community and building that into the program we have currently. Building sustainably locally led forest management structures. And then a really big component is research. As we said, we've been working on the ground for the past 20 years. So we've got quite a lot of research that is long-term research, which we're able to use and filter into projects to understand and know where to go from there, which will have the biggest impact. So yeah, we've got a few, long-term strategies which we build projects around. So yeah, it helps us look further into the future, and they can be amended and adapted along the way to obviously community needs and resource needs too.
Thanks, Sam. It's great to hear that you're thinking like so far ahead, like even up to 15 years with your planning. So that's really interesting. So Henna, if we go to you next about what your vision is for LCN over the next 10 years and maybe how you're also supporting your members with their long-term strategy and planning for conservation.
Yeah, thank you. At the LCN, in the 10 years, we really want to help and support our members, and we have always the 4 words for our members. We want to have our members to get inspiration, education, empowerment, collaboration for the lemur conservation community, the Malagasy people, and the lemur fans. Don't forget the lemur fans, because we are all over lemur fans over the world, so that Madagascar's wildlife can thrive. So we just, for this, we think that with local community empowerment, the close collaboration, the education awareness, and got inspiration for the lemur conservation community, our members can achieve their goals in 10 years. And we at Lemur Conservation Network, we want to create this space for all member conservation organizations for that. And we want to spotlight every amazing work made by our members.
Oh, that's great to hear about your plans for the future with LCN. And lastly, Travis, would you like to speak on your long-term goals in terms of forestry work with Planet Madagascar?
Great, thank you. Yeah, so the echo seeds a lot with some major exceptions, and it's probably because we're a little bit smaller and younger as an organization. We haven't built the same structures that are necessary for doing some of the work to increase sustainability in our projects. We rely very heavily on a grant to grant sort of model for our projects and our programs, and we don't have a very large donor base, and so we can't support larger projects through donors specifically. It has to come through grants. So what that has done for us is it's at this point forced us in a way, in a really interesting, and I think a really interesting positive trajectory, in some of the same ways that SEED is going. And for us is to divest away from Planet Madagascar conducting forest restoration to the communities conducting forest restoration. And that we found for our communities, we're able to create some efficiencies there that allow us to, instead of having Planet Madagascar manage nurseries, we can have local cooperatives managing nurseries that Planet Madagascar funds. And so it ends up costing us less, provides more on the ground sort of input from the communities, and more money goes directly into communities as opposed to through Planet Madagascar, which functionally was the same thing because it goes through our organization, which are made up of mostly community members. So it's kind of 6 of one, a half of a dozen of the other, but connects right to the communities. This, we hope, will increase sustainability. We've incorporated some level of research components because I'm a researcher. That's what I'm paid to do in my other work. And so I try to incorporate that as best as we can. But being a small organization, our capacity for that's a little bit less than I've seen with SEED. SEED is fantastic with the work they're doing on the ground. And I think this is what SEED would say too. We're not planting trees at Planet Madagascar, so we're building forests. So in 10 years from now, I'm hoping that we start to see those seedlings that we planted 10 years earlier starting to become forests, because forests take decades to establish. While trees may take years to grow, forests take decades to centuries. And so this isn't a plan that we have that is for the next few years. It's a plan that we have for the rest of time. You know, we're going to have to continue managing forests for lemurs and people in Madagascar for a long time. So I almost think of it like a 50-year plan is sort of the beginning, and then the next, 100 years, 500 years, and 1,000 years is the other plans. And that's just done through thinking about it holistically from the beginning. So again, forests, not trees. Sustainable forest communities that live in connection with lemurs and forest, as opposed to sort of trying to separate these things into different components.
Thank you, Travis. Really like that quote. We're not planting trees, we're building forests. So we're going to now have a bit of a Q&A session. So if you'd like to ask a question, please either post it in the chat box or give us a wave, or say I have a question in the chat box and we can invite you to unmute yourselves. I think there is already one question concerning, I think this relates to Project Allah, Sam, about which 3 lemurs is Project Allah working with?
Yeah, so we've got the southern woolly lemur, which is our biggest. I do have to say that they're all nocturnal. So the reason that we are targeting those species is because they're nocturnal and they've not been seen to traverse over like the bare ground just in the forest. So yeah, we've got the southern woolly lemur, the Thomas's dwarf lemur, and the Antinous mouse lemur. Sorry, I nearly said it in the scientific name there. So
thank you, Sam. Yeah, if anyone has any other questions, please yeah, put them in the chat box, give us a wave. I've got a question for the panel, and that is what can people who are not in Madagascar be doing to support conservation work in Madagascar? Travis, go to you first for that one.
Great, I'll just say it, send money. Send it to PlanMag, send it to Seed. I don't care who you send it to in Madagascar, send it to the LCN. They need money, they need your cash, they need your in-kind assistance. There's lots of ways you can help if cash is hard. Like Plan Madagascar has done, we'll do any request, big or small, we'll engage with. We just did a campaign with Pen Pals with schools in Alaska and Madagascar, where kids drew what their wildlife was in Alaska, and then the kids in Madagascar drew their wildlife in their communities, and they exchanged those through an electronic book. And that was great because we could do that with technology nowadays. So when you're home, think about every day you probably ate something that had something from Madagascar in it. If you've ever had vanilla or anything sweet, although vanilla is harder to get now, or in your life, you've probably eaten something from Madagascar. Learn as much as you can about Madagascar. Learning about something makes you care about something. Making you care about something makes you do something about it. So at the very least, just find out what a shafaka is, or Zabumafu if you've watched that show. Find out what that Anush microcebus species, that little mouse lemur they have down in the south, and we have a couple up where we work. Find out that these are the smallest primates in the world and some of the most endangered animals that exist on the planet. And so make sure you learn as much as you can and then send money.
So Henna, have you got anything to add about what people can be doing from their homes who aren't in Madagascar to support all 3 of these organizations' great work?
Yeah, thank you. I totally agree with Travis. There are a lot of ways to help Madagascar. Actually, we have a web page dedicated for how can you help when you are not in Madagascar. Yeah, I think learn about Madagascar will be the first thing. And when I say learn about Madagascar, we have many cultures, ethnics, and there are more things to learn about Madagascar. When you go in Madagascar and just go in Antananarivo, you don't learn about Madagascar. So just maybe my first advice is to learn really about Madagascar lemurs and the really landscapes and the diversity, because we have species diversity, but we have also the diversity in terms of cultures, in terms of traditions. So that would be the first thing. The second thing is find an organization to support. And we have a web page dedicated on that on our website. I can put in the chat later. And also consider to do I would say an eco-friendly action. Consider to do maybe when like Travis said, when you have every day you can eat, and we don't have a struggle to hit, but think about some people, like in south of Madagascar, the impact of climate change is real. It's every day. They cope every day from this impact of climate change. So if you, with just a small action every day to contribute on this action to reduce impact of climate change, it will help, really help the country like Madagascar. So there are a lot of ways to help Madagascar, and I will put the webpage in the chat, our LCN webpage. Yeah.
Thank you for that. That's interesting. I agree that lots of small decisions can come together and make a big difference. So that's really nice to hear. A question from David Ashley. Hi, David. Thank you for the support on Twitter, by the way. I recognise your name. He asks for Seed and Planet Madagascar, how do we identify the community to work with, given the issues already referred to about fires being started by people not living locally? So I'll hand that over to you, Lisa.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it, about what is community? And I think for all of us, no matter where in the world we live, you know, my community can be my street, it can be my family, it can be my social media network, but really it's all of those people and that sort of landscape that has an impact on any particular thing. So if we think about the example of fires in Project Allah, it's a really interesting one because the forest is based in one Fukuntani, so it's based in one village, but I think there are another 5 Fukuntanis that border it. But even more so, some of those grasslands, very much like the one that you can see behind me today, actually is where people graze their zebu. Now, St. Luce doesn't particularly have a history of zebu, but over towards the mountains, they do have a history of zebu grazing. So in sort of June, July, August, they herd their zebu down the plains that comes very near to the forest in St. Luce. But because it's dry, because it's windy season, and because the soil isn't particularly fertile, people will light fires. They'll light fires, the wind takes them up, they sort of destroy the land, huge risk to the forest, but what they do is it builds the green shoots. For then the zebus that they're herding, which is their primary concern, they have food for that journey. So it's really difficult to say, well, what is the community? Is the community simply the Fukuntani of St. Luce? But if we just concentrated there, as Sam said, we wouldn't understand the impact of the other communities that are bordering the forest, but even more so, those communities that are based up in the mountains, herding their zebu down, and actually why they start fires. And I think it's really crucial to understand why things happen, because without understanding why, we can't then work with those very different groups of people, whether, you know, they're people who have land and, you know, their land is in danger of fires, or whether it is the zebu herders who have done this for generation after generation, basically to get food for their livestock. So we take community as very, very wide, not only the people who are living where we are working, the people who are having an impact on that, and then of course government structures as well, because we, you know, part of every community is the government structure, whether that's the elders of the village, whether it's the mayors, or whether it's the ministries based in the town. And really only by listening and working and understanding everyone's viewpoint are we really going to put forward some good mitigation efforts and bring those communities along with us so that they can begin to manage those, in this case, fires, so that it doesn't impact on their forest and it doesn't impact on their fields where they're growing their crops.
Sahini, would you have a similar insight on that? Because David's also asked for LCN, how you build overall support for forest conservation in Madagascar, even among those living far from forests.
Yeah, I totally agree with what Lisa said about understanding and listening. That's really important. At LCN, we think also that education is really important, and we always think also about when we talk about community, we should consider different levels of community, because for in Madagascar, when you talk about forest conservation, we really, as Malagasy, we talk about our legacy, the biodiversity, the lemurs, our legacy, our heritage. But what are the behavior? What kind of behavior do you want to have to conserve lemurs? Who has to conserve lemurs? Who has to understand why lemurs are important? And this behavior, this education is really important, even through the young people who are living far from forest, like in town, because the education in Madagascar, at schools, we don't learn about that. And that's sad, but that's the reality. So we have to educate people, educate kids when they are living far from forests, and say, where you see lemurs at the park of Timbazaz, for example, but why is it important for Madagascar, for the biodiversity? We have to educate and to do more and more awareness. And we think that it's really important, and each conservation organization should do that. And it's important, it's even more important for those who are at proximity in forest, but it's also important for the next generation in Madagascar. And that's the key success, we think, that one of key success to achieve forest conservation.
Thank you for that. I hope that answered your questions nicely, David. That takes us nicely on to the next question, actually, from Ella, who asks, could you explain more about how you work with communities? Are you mostly working with the younger or older generations? Travis, would you like to take this one?
Sure, thank you. Yeah, because it's for us, it's very similar to seed. So sorry, I have to repeat that a lot, but I steal all their ideas. Because they're good. We have 3 core communities, and then we have up to 40 peripheral communities that we engage with. So the core communities, we do projects where we engage with everyone, so at all age levels. And then in the peripheral communities, depending on the project, we engage with them in different levels. So we have a similar issue regarding cattle grazing in the areas that we work, and it's an area that's known for cattle grazing. So fires are repeatedly started by people, and naturally it's a mix. So then we work with these cattle groups. Those would all be adults. We work directly with them on mitigation strategies and plans, and we're now developing sort of a management strategy for the landscape they use. But then we also have a film that we take around around the national park and care fonts that we work, and that's meant for young and old. And we bring a generator and a sheet and a projector, and we take a Zebu cart, and we plop a little conservation video that's done in Malagasy for Malagasy people about forest conservation. And so we engage young and old there. We do a lot of projects with kids as well, so that we can connect them with kids in North America, but also just education stuffs, just stuff about conservation and forests, and getting them excited about lemurs. Where we work, we have 8 species of lemurs, and like a lot of parts of Madagascar, local residents don't always appreciate, because they don't have the freedom to travel. They don't always appreciate that their lemurs are unique to their forest. And if they go 100 kilometers in any direction, the forests and lemurs are different. And so once they learn that their lemurs are unique, they're much more interested in them. I kind of make the analogy where I live, there's a lot of squirrels. No one here cares about squirrels. They're everywhere. Lemurs, for some people, they're everywhere. And so once they learn about the uniqueness of them, then they start getting much more excited. And that's true of young and old. And I'll finish off with one project I did actually separate from Planet Madagascar, but I did a walk around the national parks. We walked 300 kilometers on an expedition to meet with the oldest community members in every community that we visited, so they could explain to us what the forest was like when they were young. And we published a paper about that a few months ago. And it was shocking just to hear about what forest was like, how much change has happened. But it was just so amazing to hear the stories that people, some of these people were in their 80s. So they had seen a lot of change over their lives. So it was really exciting to engage with them. So young and old, anyone who will listen, we'll work with in our communities.
That's really nice to hear. I think what's really pleasing is that both with SEED, Planet Madagascar and LCR, we all have communities at the heart of everything we do. So that's something that will certainly bring us together and that we all have in common. Just quickly, one last question, because we are overrunning slightly. I think we could talk about all of this forever, but we unfortunately are a little bit time limited now. From Louise, do you have any recommendations for any good books on conservation in Madagascar? I'm not too sure on who would have some insight on this, maybe Sam? Or Travis, or anyone?
Sorry, Sam, I'm only going to do this because it's a shameless plug. My partner, she wrote a book called Chasing Lemurs, and you can get it anywhere and on any of the online platforms. But it's about her research project in Madagascar, and she talks about it as it's her journey into womanhood, but a love letter to Madagascar. It's called Chasing Lemurs by Carrie-Anne McGugan. So that's a completely shameless plug for her, so that she gets her $1.75 from that book. Wherever it's sold, whether it's international. I don't think it's in Madagascar, but you'll find it in most other places.
I was just about to recommend the same book. So
it must be really
There's
good.
also an Alison Jolly book. It's actually, she did her research down in Burundi. I, for the life of me, can't think what it's called. I think it's just something like Into Madagascar or something. But yeah, it's about the research that she started in Burundi. And the 20 years that she worked there, and it's a great book.
It seems like there's a wealth of good literature on this topic, so maybe that's a blog post that SEED will be posting soon. So I'll pass back to Amelia to do a roundup.
Thanks, Laura, and thank you to all our panelists this evening even. It's been really great to hear from you all, and I've certainly learned stuff. I'm sure everyone who's attended has learned something. It's been really interesting to hear about the similarities and differences between the organisations, and what a nice way to celebrate World Rainforest Day. We'll be posting some post-event details in the Facebook page, and I'm sure if you follow all of us on social media, you will be able to hear about the latest updates and news from all our organisations. But yeah, thank you everyone for coming. It's great to see you all here, and I hope you enjoyed the event.
Yeah, thanks for coming, everyone. And thank you for all the support on social media. It's very much appreciated. So lovely to see you all.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.